The dog stopped in the middle of the frozen creek. His paws sank through the thin snow. His head turned toward the black hills west of the farm, though there was no trail there, no house, no smoke, nothing but dead grass and cedar trees bent by years of wind. "Come on, Ranger," Clara Hale called. The dog did not move. Behind her, the men who had taken her home were already closing the gate. The iron chain scraped through the wooden posts. A lock snapped shut. Clara looked back once. Her father's cabin stood beneath a gray November sky. Smoke still rose from the chimney, but it no longer came from her fire. Silas Creed's hired men had entered before sunrise, carried her belongings into the yard, and placed a county paper on the table. The paper claimed her father had sold the land before his death. Clara knew it was false. She also knew that a woman with no money, no husband, and no witness could not stop 3 armed men with a stamped document. Her 11-year-old daughter, Lucy, stood beside the handcart with both hands wrapped around its wooden handle. "Mama, where will we sleep?" Clara tightened the wool scarf around the girl's neck. "We will find a place before dark." She spoke softly, but her eyes moved toward the northern sky. The clouds were low and flat. A pale strip rested near the horizon. No birds crossed above the fields. Even the crows had left the fence posts empty. Snow would come before night. Perhaps much more than snow. Ranger released a low sound from his chest. Then he climbed the western bank of the creek. "Ranger," Clara called again. He looked over his shoulder. The old shepherd mix had belonged to her father. Since Samuel Hale's death 2 years earlier, Ranger had slept beside Clara's door each night. He had never wandered. He had never ignored her voice. Now he turned west and began walking. Lucy watched him disappear between the cottonwoods. "He wants us to follow." Clara looked at the road east. Willow Ridge was 6 miles away. The church might give them a corner of the meeting room. Someone might offer soup. Yet Silas Creed owned the feed store, the freight yard, and half the notes held against the farmers in town. Anyone who sheltered Clara would pay for it later. The wind lifted loose snow from the creek bed and pushed it across her boots. Ranger barked once from the trees. Clara took hold of the cart. "Stay close." They followed the dog. The land grew rough beyond the creek. The cart wheels struck stones hidden beneath the grass. Lucy pushed from behind whenever the axle caught in a rut. Inside the cart were 2 blankets, a cast iron pan, a sack of oats, 3 jars of beans, her father's axe, and a wooden box containing the family Bible. Everything else remained scattered outside the locked cabin. The wind sharpened as they climbed. Lucy's cheeks turned red, her steps shortened. Clara removed one glove and pressed the back of her fingers against the girl's face. Too cold. She opened the cart and pulled out one of the blankets. "You wear this. What about you?" "I am walking. Walking keeps the blood moving." Lucy knew it was not the whole truth. She said nothing. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and kept pushing. Ranger waited at the top of each rise. The moment they came near, he moved again. He was leading them somewhere. That was the only reason Clara continued. If you have ever trusted an animal when the road made no sense, then you understand why she followed him. Sometimes a dog notices the one sign human eyes pass over. Near sundown, snow began falling in hard white grains. The western hills swallowed the last light. Cedar branches bent over the narrow path. The cart became harder to pull. Clara's wet skirt struck her boots with every step. "Ranger," she called. "Enough." The dog vanished beneath a leaning cedar. Clara left the cart and climbed after him. At first she saw only roots, stones, and a wall of dead vines. Then Ranger pushed his nose beneath the vines and pulled them aside. A wooden door stood behind them. It had been built into the hillside. Clara stopped breathing for a moment. The door was low, broad, and darkened by age. Iron hinges held it against a frame made from thick cedar beams. Moss covered the upper edge. Grass had grown across the roof until the whole structure looked like part of the hill. Lucy came up beside her. "Who built this?" Clara stepped closer. A small shape had been cut into the center of the door. 3 mountain peaks above a winding river. Her fingers traced the worn lines. Her father had carved that mark on every tool he owned. This was his. She pulled at the handle. The door did not open. Ranger scratched near a flat stone beside the frame. Clara knelt and brushed away the snow. Beneath the stone lay an oilcloth bundle. Inside was an iron key. Her hand closed around it. The key turned with a deep scrape. Warm, dry air touched her face when the door opened. The room inside was small, but carefully built. Stone walls held back the earth. Shelves lined one side. Split firewood filled the other. A narrow iron stove stood beneath a clay pipe that ran through the ceiling. There were sacks of flour, dried beans, salt, lamp oil, candles, and folded wool blankets. Everything had been waiting in the dark. On the table sat a sealed tin box. Clara opened it. Her father's handwriting covered the first page inside. My dear Clara, a man may steal a deed. He may buy a judge. He may close every road he thinks you can take. So I built you a road he cannot see. Clara lowered herself onto the wooden stool. Lucy leaned against her shoulder. The letter continued. Creed will come for the farm one day. When he does, do not fight him there. Take Lucy. Trust Ranger. The dog knows this place. Beneath the letter lay the true deed to the farm. There was also a ledger filled with names, dates, payments, and land transfers connected to Silas Creed. Enough evidence to send a powerful man to prison. Clara lifted her eyes toward the open doorway. Snow was already covering their tracks. Far below, through the cedar trees, a lantern moved along the creek. Then another appeared. Men were following them. Ranger stepped in front of Lucy. His teeth showed. Clara closed the tin box, pushed the door shut, and lowered the heavy wooden bar into place. Outside, a horse whinnied. A man's voice rose through the storm. Clara Hale, we know you came up here. The first blow struck the door hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling beams. Lucy grabbed Clara's sleeve. Ranger stood beneath the latch, his body stiff, his eyes fixed on the wood. Clara moved the tin box beneath the narrow cot and covered it with one of the spare blankets. Outside, a man struck the door again. Open it, he shouted. Mr. Creed owns this ground. Clara recognized the voice. Wade Mercer. He had worked for Silas Creed since he was 16. He rode hard, drank harder, and smiled whenever another person had nowhere left to go. Clara lifted the iron poker from beside the stove. This hut belonged to my father. Mercer laughed from the other side. Your father is dead. Another man walked along the outer wall. His boots pressed through the growing snow. Clara followed the sound with her eyes. There were at least 3 of them. Maybe 4. The hut had no windows. Only the door and the narrow stovepipe connected the room to the world outside. Lucy whispered, Can they get in? Clara looked at the cedar beams. Her father had built them thick. The door opened inward, and the bar rested inside deep stone slots. An axe might cut through it, but not quickly. Not before the snow gets worse. She hoped that was true. A blade struck the door. Wood chips dropped near Ranger's paws. The dog did not flinch. Clara lit the lamp and lowered the flame until the room held only a weak golden light. Then she opened the stove and placed 2 thin pieces of cedar over the coals. She could not waste wood. She could not fill the pipe with thick smoke either. Outside, Mercer shouted orders. One man worked at the door. Another climbed the hill, searching for the stovepipe. A third moved toward the cedar trees where Clara had left the handcart. Lucy sat on the cot, wrapped in the blanket. Clara placed a finger against her lips. A scraping sound came from the roof. Someone had found the pipe. The stove flame shifted. Smoke pushed back through the iron opening. Clara crossed the room, closed the stove vent, and smothered the fire with a pan of ash. Mercer's men had blocked the pipe. Within seconds, the room smelled of burned wood. Clara dropped to her knees and opened a small wooden cover near the floor. Fresh air entered through a hidden clay tube. Her father had built a second passage through the earth. He had expected trouble. The thought pressed against her ribs. Samuel Hale had known Creed would come. He had known the farm papers were not safe. He had known his daughter might one day be locked inside a hill while armed men waited outside. Yet he had left her more than food. He had left choices. Clara crawled along the wall, testing each stone with her fingers. Near the back corner, one stone moved beneath her hand. She pulled it free. Behind it was a narrow space lined with cedar boards. A tunnel, not large enough for an adult to walk through, wide enough to crawl. Cold air touched her face from somewhere deep inside the hill. Lucy stared at the opening. Where does it go? I do not know. A heavy strike hit the door again. This time, part of the outer plank cracked. Clara looked at Ranger. The dog had already moved toward the tunnel. He sniffed once, then crawled into the darkness. Clara pulled the tin box from beneath the cot and tied it inside her coat. Lucy, go after him. The girl's face tightened. What about you? I will come behind you. Another piece of the door broke away. A man pushed his gloved hand through the opening and reached for the bar. Clara swung the poker. Iron struck bone. The hand vanished. A scream burst from outside. Mercer cursed. Clara shoved Lucy toward the tunnel. Go! Lucy dropped to her hands and knees and crawled after Ranger. Clara placed the lamp near the stove, then pulled blankets and sacks across the tunnel opening. From the doorway, it looked like a pile of stored goods. She crawled in backward and dragged the loose stone into place behind her. Darkness closed around them. The tunnel smelled of cedar roots and dry soil. Lucy's breathing came fast ahead of her. Keep moving, QR whispered. Ranger scratched forward. Behind them, the hut door broke. Wood fell across the floor. Men entered. Their boots crossed the room only a few feet from Clara's head. She stopped moving. Lucy stopped too. Through the thin boards, Mercer's voice came clearly. Find the papers. Sacks struck the floor. Shelves were pulled down. Glass jars broke against stone. One of the men kicked apart the cot. They are not here. They did not vanish. Mercer moved closer to the hidden opening. Clara pressed both hands against the earth. She could hear his breathing. Then Ranger growled from farther down the tunnel. The sound was low, but it carried. Mercer went quiet. There, he said. The pile covering the opening shifted. Clara crawled forward. Move, Lucy. The tunnel narrowed around her shoulders. Roots caught in her hair. Her knees scraped over rough boards. Behind her, the stone cover fell. Lantern light entered the passage. Mercer fired once. The shot struck the tunnel wall. Dry earth dropped across Clara's back. Lucy cried out. Clara pushed her forward. Do not stop. Ranger reached the far end and began digging beneath another wooden cover. Snow fell through the opening. Cold white light entered. Lucy crawled out first. Clara followed and pulled the cover shut just as Mercer reached the middle of the tunnel. They had come out on the far side of the hill among thick cedar trees. The snowfall had become a hard white curtain. Clara could barely see 10 feet ahead. Ranger seized Lucy's coat sleeve and pulled west. Clara followed. Behind them, Mercer broke through the tunnel exit. There they are, a rifle fired. The ball struck a cedar trunk beside Clara's head and tore away a strip of bark. She grabbed Lucy's hand and ran downhill. Snow hid the rocks. Branches struck their faces. Ranger moved ahead, choosing a path through the trees, as if he had traveled it before. Then the ground disappeared beneath Clara's feet. She fell down a steep bank and landed beside a frozen ravine. Lucy slid after her. Across the narrow ravine stood a small stone building with a collapsed roof. A lantern burned inside. Someone was there. Clara pulled Lucy toward it. The door opened before they reached it. An old man stepped out with a long rifle in his hands. His white beard reached his coat collar. He looked past Clara, toward the figures coming through the snow. Then he raised the rifle. "Wade Mercer," he called. "Take one more step and your mother will bury what is left of you." Mercer stopped on the opposite bank. The old man lowered his eyes toward Clara. "You have Samuel's box?" Clara touched the hard metal beneath her coat. "Yes." "Then get inside." He kept the rifle aimed across the ravine. Creed has already killed once for what is written in that ledger. The old man barred the stone building's door behind them. Inside, the air smelled of lamp oil, leather, and damp wool. A narrow stove burned in one corner. Its pipe leaned through a hole in the broken roof, held in place by strips of hammered tin. Lucy dropped beside Ranger and wrapped both arms around his neck. Clara remained near the door. "Who are you?" The old man rested his rifle against the wall. "Name is Elias Boon." He removed his gloves. 2 fingers were missing from his left hand. "I worked with your father before you were born." Clara studied his face. She remembered hearing the name once, long ago, when Samuel Hale thought she was asleep. Her father had spoken quietly with another man beside the kitchen fire. A silver claim, a dead surveyor, and someone named Boon who had escaped with a bullet in his shoulder. "You knew Silas Creed?" Elias gave a dry laugh. "I knew him before he bought the name." He lifted a kettle from the stove and poured hot water into 3 tin cups. Silas Creed was born Silas Crowley. He and his brother ran false land deeds through 3 territories. Your father discovered what they were doing when he worked as a surveyor in Colorado. Clara pulled the tin box from inside her coat. Elias looked at it, but he did not reach for it. Samuel kept records? Names, dates, payments. Then he kept enough to hang Creed. Lucy sat close to the stove, rubbing Ranger's wet fur with the corner of her blanket. Clara placed the box on a stone table. "Why did my father hide everything instead of taking it to a judge?" "Because Creed owned the first judge." Elias turned toward the narrow doorway. "He bought the second one. The third disappeared before the hearing." Clara's hand tightened around the cup. "And my father?" Elias looked at her carefully. Samuel did not die from a fall. The room seemed to lose what little warmth it had. Clara had been told her father slipped from the ridge during a rainstorm. They found him at the bottom of a ravine with his neck broken and his coat torn open. No one had found his watch. No one had found the county papers he had carried that morning. Elias continued quietly. "Wade Mercer followed him from town. I saw Mercer return alone after dark. There was blood on his sleeve." Clara stared at the stove flame. For 2 years, she had accepted her father's death because grief had left no space for suspicion. Now, every detail returned with a different shape. The torn coat, the missing papers, Creed attending the burial and standing too close to the grave. Outside, horses moved through the snow. Elias reached for the rifle. They crossed the ravine. Clara opened the ledger. "We cannot stay here." "No." Elias pulled a canvas bag from beneath the table and began filling it with cartridges. "But we do not need to outrun them. We need to reach someone Creed cannot buy." "Who?" "Territorial Judge Nathaniel Voss." Clara shook her head. "Voss is in Fort Rowan. That is 30 miles. 26 through the North Pass. In this storm?" Elias looked at Ranger. "Your father trained that dog on the route." Clara turned. Ranger was watching the old man. "Trained him for what?" "To carry messages between Samuel and me." Elias crouched and touched a scar beneath the dog's collar. "He knew the hidden trails before Creed ever sent men after you." A shot broke the upper corner of the door. Stone chips flew across the floor. Lucy screamed and dropped behind the stove. Elias fired through a narrow gap in the wall. A horse cried outside. Then Wade Mercer's voice rose through the wind. "Send out the woman and the box. We leave the old man and the child alive." Elias reloaded. "He is lying about all 3. Clara looked around the ruined building. The back wall had partially collapsed. Snow had collected between the stones. Beyond it, the hill dropped toward the northern woods. "Can we leave through there?" "Not without being seen." Clara opened one of the ledger's pages. Names filled the columns. Farmers who had lost land. Widows forced from cabins. Payments made to county officers. Near the bottom of one page, she found Wade Mercer's name beside a date 2 days before her father died. $50. The next line read, "Recovery of survey maps. Samuel refuses surrender." Clara closed the ledger. She no longer felt afraid of Mercer. Fear required uncertainty. Now she knew exactly what he was. "We do not run yet," she said. Elias glanced at her. What are you thinking? Clara looked toward the unstable stones at the rear of the building. How old is this place? An abandoned powder store. Miners used it before the vein failed. Is there powder left? Elias followed her eyes. 2 small barrels beneath the floor, too damp to fire properly. Properly may not be necessary. Mercer's men struck the front door with a timber. The hinges groaned. Clara moved quickly. Elias lifted the floor hatch. Together, they dragged out 1 barrel. The wood was black with age. Powder leaked from a split near the iron band. Clara poured a narrow trail across the floor toward the rear wall. Lucy watched silently. Clara knelt before her. When I tell you, take Ranger and follow Mr. Boon into the woods. Do not look back. Lucy's lower lip trembled. You are coming too? Yes. Promise. Clara held her daughter's face in both hands. I promise. The front door cracked. A gloved hand reached through. Elias raised his rifle, but Clara stopped him. Wait! She placed the oil lamp beside the powder trail. Then she and Elias moved behind the broken rear wall with Lucy and Ranger. Mercer kicked through the remaining boards. He entered first, pistol raised. 2 men followed. The room appeared empty. Mercer saw the open tin box on the table. Clara had left several blank pages inside it. He crossed the room and lifted them. His face twisted. Find her. One of the men noticed the lamp. Then he noticed the black line running from it. His eyes widened. Clara threw a stone through the lamp glass. The flame dropped. Powder flashed across the floor. Mercer shouted. The fire reached the barrel. The explosion was not large enough to destroy the building. It did not need to be. The rear wall broke outward in a wave of stone, smoke, and frozen earth. The roof shifted. A heavy beam crashed across the doorway, trapping Mercer and his men inside. Clara, Lucy, Elias, and Ranger ran into the northern woods. Behind them, Mercer screamed for help. No one turned back. They traveled until darkness covered the hills. The storm weakened near midnight, but the temperature fell sharply. Lucy began stumbling. Elias carried her for half a mile before his injured shoulder failed. Clara took the girl. Her arms burned. Her breath tore at her throat. Each step sank nearly to her knees. Ranger moved ahead, disappearing and returning through the snow. At dawn, he stopped beside a dead pine. Beneath its roots was a narrow opening. Another shelter. Smaller than the first hut, but dry. Inside they found blankets, lamp oil, dried meat, and a wooden box marked with Samuel Hale's mountain symbol. Clara opened it. There was no food inside, only one sealed letter. The words on the front were written in her father's hand. For Clara, when she learns the truth about my death. Her fingers shook as she broke the seal. The first line stopped her breath. Creed did not kill me for the land. He killed me because the land hides something worth more than every ranch in Willow Ridge. Clara held the letter close to the lantern. For several long moments she could not force herself to read another word. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine branches. Ranger lay across the doorway, ears raised, while Elias quietly added another log to the small stove. Finally, Clara unfolded the remaining pages. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally found you. The land was never my greatest secret. What lies beneath it is. 23 years ago, before Willow Ridge existed, I worked as a government surveyor. During that survey, I discovered a small vein of exceptionally pure silver beneath Cedar Hollow. It was enough to make men kill for it. Silas Creed learned of the discovery. He offered me money to keep silent. When I refused, he began buying judges, clerks, and land agents, until every legal paper around Cedar Hollow belonged to him. He believed I had drawn a complete survey map. I never did. I destroyed every copy except one. That map is not hidden in this shelter. It is hidden where only someone carrying our family name would ever think to look. Do not search for the silver. Protect the valley instead. The silver would only bring more men like Creed. The land is worth more without it. If justice ever comes, let it come because of truth. not because of greed. I have always believed your hands were stronger than mine. I pray I was right. Your loving father, Samuel Hale. Clara slowly lowered the letter. For years she had believed her father died protecting property. Now she understood. He had died protecting people who had not even settled there yet. Elias nodded quietly. That sounds exactly like Samuel. Lucy looked up. So Grandpa never wanted the treasure? Clara smiled sadly. No. He wanted no one else to die because of it. Silence settled over the shelter. Not an empty silence. A peaceful one. Then Ranger suddenly stood. His ears pointed toward the entrance. Someone was outside. 3 slow knocks echoed against the wooden door. Elias reached for his rifle. Who is it? A weak voice answered. It's Ephraim Whitlock. Clara recognized the name immediately. The same rancher who had laughed when Creed drove her from the farm. The same man who told everyone she would freeze before winter ended. She opened the door. Whitlock almost collapsed inside. His beard was covered in frost. 2 fingers had turned black. His wife, Martha, struggled behind him, supporting their teenage son. The boy's lips were blue. Whitlock could barely meet Clara's eyes. His voice broke. I was wrong. I should never have stood with Creed. I've come to ask. He swallowed hard. If you'll help my family. The room fell completely silent. Lucy looked at her mother. Elias waited. Even Ranger remained perfectly still. Clara remembered every cruel word. Every laugh. Every face that had watched while strangers locked her out of her own home. She also remembered her father's final lesson. Protect the valley. Not yourself. The valley. Without another word, she stepped aside. Bring them in. Whitlock stared at her. You'd still help us. If I let winter decide who deserves mercy, then I become no better than the men who drove us away. Tears filled Martha Whitlock's eyes. The family entered. Lucy immediately brought extra blankets. Elias placed another kettle on the stove. Ranger walked to the freezing boy and quietly rested beside him, sharing what warmth he could. Whitlock lowered himself onto a stool. I don't know how to repay this. You don't, Clara answered. You repay the next person who knocks on your door. For the first time in many years, the proud rancher bowed his head. I swear I will. 3 days later, the blizzard finally ended. The valley looked different. Cabins had collapsed beneath the snow. Barn roofs had fallen in. Smoke no longer rose from several chimneys. Word spread quickly. The widow on the western ridge had survived. Not only survived, she had saved others. Families began arriving one by one, not asking for food, asking to learn. Clara showed them how her father built beneath the earth, how stone held warmth, how cold air could be controlled, how a shelter could outlast the harshest winter. Even Ephraim Whitlock worked beside her, carrying stone instead of pride. Weeks later, Marshal Daniel Harper rode into Cedar Hollow with federal deputies. Elias handed them Samuel Hale's ledger. Every forged deed, every bribe, every payment, every stolen farm. It was all there. Silas Creed tried to flee before sunrise. He never made it beyond the county bridge. By spring, he stood before a federal judge with enough evidence against him to erase everything he had stolen. One by one, the farms returned to their rightful owners. When Clara finally unlocked the door of her father's cabin again, nothing inside had changed. The old rocking chair still faced the fireplace. His pipe still rested on the mantel. She walked to the window overlooking the western ridge. Far beyond the trees, she could just see the hidden shelter beneath the leaning cedar. It was no longer simply a hiding place. It had become a promise. A father had built it with his hands. A faithful dog had remembered the path. And because of both, an entire valley lived to see another spring.